Hey, Krista, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Bearded Truth. I'm so glad to have you here today. Everyone, this is Krista Corbello. She is a speaker and activist and artist born in LA, and she's currently a resident in LA. Is that correct, Krista?
Yes. Yeah, Jen, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you graduated from Divine Mercy University with an MS in psychology, and your capstone project included research on family grief after abortion. And you also developed a grief intervention program for siblings who died from abortion. So I would love to know a little bit more about that because I don't
Yeah,
know much
sure.
about that.
So I call my target audience sibling survivors, the way you see in an obituary, like so and so was
Mhm.
survived by all of their family members. So I studied the kind of where grief, how it lands in the family, basically how parents respond after abortion and how that might affect their future children or their living children. So as someone who has a sibling who died by abortion, just kind of all the grief, and it's very complicated, complex grief that people experience and their families. So kind of working with individuals who have also lived through this, and kind of learning how to kind of recoup in life and be able to move on from that, because like I said, it is really complicated. I wouldn't say that every sibling survivor suffers quite what I suffered, or a lot of people that I've walked with over the years, but like I said, it's complicated. Some people see it as a pro-life ministry. I wouldn't really agree with that, because I think um, especially sibling survivors maybe feel like they don't want to judge their parents for their
Mm.
choices, or they understand why they made those choices. So I wouldn't want to give grief to someone who doesn't have it, but I do think there is some complexities and nuance there, and it's been interesting to walk with people, um, just trying to process it and go through it, and let them know that they're not alone in that. So
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think, to be fair, I think a lot of people don't even realize when they're actually suppressing or struggling with grief from something that is so suppressed, they don't even know what it is exactly that's harming them or affecting them. And so I'm curious because I know a few people personally that have heard your story. I've never had the privilege of actually hearing your story, but they tell me how deeply impactful it was to them and how powerful a testimony. And so I'm curious, like, how did you find out that you had a sibling that was aborted, and when and how did you find out? And you know,
So I was doing pro-life work. So that's why I think a lot of people paint what I've done with Even This Way as the title of the organization. But when I was doing pro-life work, I was talking about abortion from a biological,
mhm,
philosophical, and medical perspective, really. And once when I was kind of getting into those types of presentations, like really hundreds of presentations over the course of 3.5 years, it was then that my life story was kind of unfolding. So I was in my mid-20s, and um, little details would come out from my parents or my family. And it wasn't until I guess I was 24-ish, and I found out, like, after meeting my biological father, which is its own part of the story.
oh wow,
Um, but after meeting my own biological father and talking to him about his perspective on, my story of origin and why I didn't know him till I was 22. Well, it came. I found out that he had an abortion after my mom, and so that's when I realized, oh, I have a sibling who died by abortion, and they were in the same kind of circumstances I was, immigrant parents in LA and not married. And except in my case, I lived, and in that sibling's case, they died. And there was a lot of, survivor's guilt. We know survivor's guilt from other um, kind of traumas, I guess, in history. And that was something that I experienced, along with,
mm,
just feelings of unworthiness, not, like, why did I get to live? And feelings of doom too, like distrust, and
that's
um,
understandable.
it's, yeah, and like hard to forgive as well. But
Mm,
also, mostly, I would say my like driving emotion during that time was just sadness. And every day was different. Every moment was different. And some days I felt numb, and some days I felt angry, and some days I felt sad, and most days I felt unworthy to be alive. And so working through that was, and not having language for it until I went to my grad school program and getting to see the psychological literature on it, and then finally having language for it was a huge part of my like being able to recover and move on from life. So
So
that's a
why
big
do you
part for me.
think, yeah, so why do you think you struggled with a feeling of unworthiness? Where was that stemming from?
From
Like,
feeling
oh,
like I got to live and
unworthy.
my sibling died.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we were
And
virtually in the same circumstance. Um,
did your mom consider aborting you as well, or?
I don't know that she considered it like, I mean, maybe she like called an abortion clinic and like hung up because she was afraid, but her family and my bio dad did pressure her to abort. And she was, it was definitely a part of the conversation in her circles
Wow.
of influence. But my mom's pretty strong willed and she wanted me from the time that she knew that I was there. But I do think it was a very difficult choice for her because she was disowned and broken up with. So, um, yeah, I wouldn't say that she considered abortion except for the fact that everyone else was considering it for her.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you know like the sex of your sibling? Was it like a boy or girl? Do you know?
No, I don't know. I've always just called them MK, and I have like two names in my head that
Oh,
could stand for. But
I love that you gave a name. That's wonderful.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was a part of my grieving process too. I went to a retreat for it was actually for people who had an abortion, but because they didn't have retreats for people whose sibling died by abortion, that I knew of at the time. I have since found out that they do have those kinds of retreats through Lumina Ministries, and they've been around for 15 years. But when I was Googling once a week, my sibling died by abortion, I didn't find anything on Google. So
Mm,
um, yeah, that was something that I was just searching for and looking for as a sibling survivor. So I wanted to create a space that when people do Google, my sibling died by abortion, that they would find my
mhm,
website. They
mhm.
would find other stories from other siblings and a lot of my research and a panel that I put together with other sibling survivors. So it's very accessible on the internet
Well,
because,
praise God for that. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to empathize with you because like I lost a sibling, my oldest brother, and his name is Michael, and my mom had a miscarriage and it was a little boy. And so it was the first. So I technically have there's seven siblings actually, seven beard siblings. And so he has a name, and Nathan even had my other brother had a real powerful dream one time where he met Michael, and it was, you know, an incredible experience. And we always felt this distinct feeling like when we sat around the table at Thanksgiving or Christmas, like there was a spot missing. So I really do empathize with that. Like it's something that like the whole family feels like so instinctively and so deeply. And for people that have had loss and aren't, connecting with it and healing from it, it's still there. Because a loss is a loss and a death is a death, and it is indeed a human life, and it was supposed to be a part of our story. And I think that Michael is still a part of our story, but just in a different way. He's still able to pray for us and intercede for us. That is my belief, and I do feel and sense his presence through his prayers. So yeah, so I from a perspective of a young girl who is living just the normal American human life, modern life, being slightly, you know, promiscuous and just sleeping around, and it's actually very accepted and almost like promoted by our culture today. And she considers like, oh, I don't understand why these chicks are so upset over a clump of cells. It wasn't a life. It's not a life. Well, how would you respond to her from that perspective?
Yeah. So for a teenage girl who maybe doesn't understand the life from the moment of conception, um, first of all, I wouldn't, shame her for that because I think when we're 14, 15, and even for me when I was, 24, I'm still like intellectually exploring things. I encourage people to be open about what they believe and why they
Mm,
believe it and who they heard it from, and being very um I like to say to stay curious. Like it's important for me to stay curious because if someone's genuinely looking for the truth, they're going to find the truth. And I mean, most people maybe aren't interested in the truth and they're just interested in um yeah, maybe they're just interested in what their
sure.
family says or what their friend group is saying. But I think it's a richer life when you know what you believe and why you believe it. And so to question where you get your information from, when, like, I was a high school teacher for a little while, and they would say, "Oh, this is a reputable source because it was on TV." And I would say, like, is it really? Like, do we really learn everything that we need to learn from TV?
Mm.
And I'm not saying that, the news it's all conspiracy theories on the news or anything, but I do think that it's important to question what you're getting, where it came from, why that person is sharing it like that. And that's not in the vein of being disbelieving or untrusting. I think it's just important to know why you believe things. I think I just, personally, I want to live out what I believe. That's a huge motivator for me, to be able to be, I guess, integrated with what I believe by the way that I live it. So as a Catholic and a pro-life person, I want to be able to live that to the best degree that I can, which means I've had to question things. And I wouldn't necessarily call questioning times of doubt so much as times of darkness, because, there's, in our mind, in our formation, no matter what age you are, there's still room to grow. And
Mhm.
if someone doesn't believe that life, is, if you don't believe with the biological sense that, something that's growing and has certain types of cells, like human cells, and it's a growing human living thing,
A
which they're
distinct DNA.
with distinct DNA, and you don't believe that's a human life, like, embryologists don't even agree with you. Like, not even a pro-choice embryologist would believe you. There are pro-choice embryology textbooks, who would say that life does begin from that moment of conception. So, like you said, it's distinct, it's alive, and it's human. And there are, I mean, that's a biological fact. Now, if you're getting into the philosophy of it, I can understand, trying to grapple with that as a teenager or as a college student. And again, it's about having good conversations and not just talking to people who agree with you. I prefer talking to people who disagree with me, because then I can understand even further why I believe what I believe. And also, as a speaker, like, I like to know what other people believe so that I can address what society is saying, or what young people are saying, or college students, or whatever group I'm with. So continue questioning, continue asking questions. And if you're genuinely interested in the truth, you will find the truth. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the problem is when people are not interested or don't care what the truth is. They just want to have their own way with their life. But I agree with you. Like, if you really want to know the truth, I always say the truth is both knowable and discoverable. And so, yes, I think if someone wants to know the scientific facts and the truth of, at conception, the development of the human life and what makes it distinctly human, and not just a clump of cells that has, no distinct humanness or life or soul. And so I know it's a complex thing. And as far as, like, I mean, the creation of life is beautiful and mysterious and complex, but it's also scientific, it's biological. And yes, there is a philosophy behind it, a theology behind it, of us being living, breathing human souls. That's also a separate topic. And, that is a part of, a spiritual walk and an understanding of life on a supernatural level, which is beautiful and powerful, and also necessary to understand, because uh, we aren't just a clump of cells even right now. We're not just a body. We have a soul, we have a spirit, and we are going somewhere after we die. Everyone does. So um, from that perspective, your advice to a 16-year-old who is inquisitive of truth is go start seeking it out, and you'll find it. And that the science is there, and the science says it's not a clump of cells, it's distinctly human with distinct DNA. But Krista, like, if someone was just being told a bunch of lies and they wanted to go make a rash decision, um, like, where would that place them if, they're not being fed the truth? They're kind of under a guise of deception and confused and not sure about it. Is there a particular source they could go to that you would recommend for good information? If they're questioning, they got pregnant, she's 16, she's trying to make a decision, like, but she wants the truth. Where should she go?
So, first of all, before even offering resources to someone who is 16 and pregnant, and that's a scary thing, of course, for any person, that is a scary thing. Meeting people where they're at is so important to me. I have a sister who was a teenager when she was pregnant. And when she told me, at the time that she told me, I had probably been giving presentations for a year and a half saying, don't judge women when they tell you that they're pregnant.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
your response is so important. And then I had the opportunity to practice what I preached
Yeah.
because
Wow,
my sister
Krista.
told me, she's 18 and she's pregnant. And I heard myself say
Yeah.
probably dozens of times, if not, 50 something times, don't judge women when they tell you that they're pregnant. And the first words out of my mouth were, we can do this. Like, we can do
Wow.
this. Like,
I
and
love
I,
that.
I thought of everything that I could do personally to help my sister.
Mm-hmm.
And it does, in my eyes, it's important that it starts in the family. And I'm glad she told me. I think I was the first person in the family that she told.
Oh, good.
And, because I did pro-life work, I knew of pregnancy centers in town. Like, I knew the owner, I knew the person who founded it. I could easily call her and tell like help my sister set up an appointment so that my sister would have parenting classes, maternity clothes, baby supplies. And there are, hundreds, thousands of pregnancy centers across the nation. Probably everywhere.
Okay.
Definitely in the US, there's also pregnancy. I wish I could remember the name of it, but let me think real quick if I can find it.
And
PHC.
what we can also plug in resources on this page, and I'll have a resource page and links too. So when we gather that information, we'll make sure all the resources are available to people listening to this or watching this.
Sure. So, definitely in my hometown, there was a pregnancy center to help women who are pregnant and need help, need support, financial support. And I think the way it worked was she took these parenting classes and then she would earn money for the baby boutique store, which was also, it was free for her, except that she went to these parenting classes. So she got diapers, she got maternity clothes, she got baby clothes. I think you could get a car seat and things like that. And there are even some maternal homes that would take in young women in the event they needed that.
Yeah.
So
Wow, I love that.
I definitely know that there are resources out there, and people just need to recognize that those resources are available because, first and foremost, that woman who is, or young woman, maybe in some circumstances, is seeking abortion is because they don't feel like they have resources. And so being able to say and know and with confidence say that there are people willing to help you and your baby, and eliminating the reason in their head why they can't do that.
That's good. That's really good. So for your sister, do you have a little niece or a little nephew now?
I do. I have a little niece who's my goddaughter, and
Oh.
yeah, she's my favorite person. I tell her that all the time when I see her. You're my favorite person.
So how old is
And
she now?
she's 6 now.
Oh, wow.
So
Oh, love that.
yeah, and I really think, like, just personally too, like having her in our family, like she brought a lot of healing to our family because she's just
Mm-hmm.
the loveliest of little girls. And my parents are divorced and holidays had been hard. But now, we spend time together, like as a family. Like I got my first family picture after the divorce because of my goddaughter is there. And so there was a lot of healing that happened in our family because of that. And I'm not saying that that's everyone's case. And I'm not saying that,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big pink bow in someone's life whenever they have a baby, but like children can really increase love in a family. And that was certainly the case with my goddaughter and with my sister,
Yeah,
choosing life for her. And
I agree.
because of our family circumstance and everything that happened with my mom when she was pregnant for me, like my sister was actually not afraid to choose life because she said, mom's not going to do to me what her parents did to her. She's not going to pressure me
Mm-hmm.
to abort. Why would she? She knows what that feels like. And so
Wow,
my sister was really able to freely choose to have life. So yeah.
that's
Again,
wonderful.
I don't think it's happily ever after. I don't think it's a simple thing, but I do think through these difficult moments in life that people are forged especially in the family. So I think,
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I don't think that there is ever a solid happily ever after in the life that we're living. I think that's fake news. I think that we have suffering in this life and unexpected trauma and really difficult seasons that we walk through. And I think that when we're young, we have no concept or understanding of what that really is or what that's like because not every person is the same. A lot of people have already experienced deep trauma when they've been very young and they understand that. But, a lot don't. And they have this view like college and then this amazing life ahead. And there's nothing, you just don't, everything is a lot of sunshine and myth. And so you're right. Like raising a child, bearing a child is hard, and there's a lot that goes into that. And at the same time, also a gift because I know when the first nieces and nephews came into my life, my two little nieces, like what a huge blessing that's been for the whole family, and in so many ways, and like you said, really brought the family even closer together. And a little life is always, no matter what, even if it's a challenge, a little life is always a gift, always. And they are wonderful and they do bring a lot of healing. So, just wanted to add that. Yeah.
yeah, for
So,
sure. I studied grief, for my capstone project. So I definitely like understand like how deep and how dark it can get. And it certainly has been many times in my own life, with my story and our family and everything. But like what I've kind of learned getting on the other side of grief is that it really enhances life. Like grief makes you, it can do one of two things. Like I really feel it could either help you be a more compassionate person, a more empathetic
mm,
person. It gives you kind of an authority into an experience to help other people in that same experience, or it can make you be bitter and more selfish and less trusting and cut yourself off from people in community, which you're wired for. So
mm,
uh, if you let grief and hard times bring you down to the ground and thinking that you can only rely on yourself, you will end up alone and you will end up very, very sad. Or if you let it, it'll help you be like an amazing person and a better person in the world and in society, and in your family, and able to make a difference and able to use your grief and your suffering for good for others. It'll help you and it'll help others. So there's a life-giving element of grief if you let it. So I really
man, what
encourage
an
people to
excellent
suffer.
topic that is. That people just don't understand that. And I've walked through some pretty difficult seasons myself, and I was suppressing a lot when I was in my 20s, And as I began walking through healing and really allowing the Holy Spirit, see, thankfully, I had faith in Christ at that point in my life, and I had a lot of guidance. But I think that some people, I will say this much, don't really, like I said before, they don't know um, the traumas of the past that have affected them. But you seem to have discovered that relatively early on in your life. And you said you met your biological father when you were 22, right? And so that was a part of your healing process. And I will say this, healing is pain. The process of healing is pain. I think Dr. Dan Allender said it best, and it's very accurate. But you're right. On the other side of that is fruitfulness and freedom and a lot of peace and a lot of maturity and a lot of empathy for other people that go through things. And you're able to have restorative um, restoration in your relationships with other people, because I think what people do when they are either knowingly or unknowingly suppressing past trauma or grief or whatever it is and not dealing with it, they do become very bitter. It's a mechanism, I find, that like kind of safeguards and protects yourself from getting hurt again, because you don't want anyone else to touch you or hurt you. You're very vulnerable. But because of that, you keep everybody at a distance. You don't trust anybody, which is understandable to an extent, but you never break free. You never get the depth and the richness and the soil of relationships, and you never find freedom. And so I'm really glad you actually brought that up. I'm kind of curious how that process of healing started for you, and the steps that you took and what that kind of was like, especially when you met your father for the first time.
Yeah, so I didn't know anything about my bio dad before I met him. And um yeah, I mean, personally, this is just my story. This doesn't have to be everyone's story, but personally for me, I knew that I wanted to be able to enter into my vocation freely and wholeheartedly. And I felt that the thing holding me back from that was this, what I called my father wound, this wound of abandonment. And so I was going to healing prayer once a month for 6 months. Lord, please heal me of my father wound so I can enter into my vocation. And well, I thought he was just going to magic erase that out of my heart, this little dark spot in my heart that I thought it would just be magic erased. And instead, my bio dad reached out to me on social media and wanted to ask for
Wow.
forgiveness and wanted to meet me. And I did end
So
up meeting him.
he found you on social.
He actually had found me a while before he reached out to me. But yeah, I think he was reaching out to my mom first, like maybe 2 years prior to that, but she doesn't know how to use Facebook Messenger. So,
Out of curiosity, was he the one that wanted her to abort you also, or
yes, bio dad,
okay?
he definitely
Wow.
maybe suggested it. I don't know how heavy handed that was, but it was definitely a conversation they had, and they ended their relationship because of it. So he reached out. He was asking for forgiveness, and that was, I would say, a 7-year process. Like, yeah, the forgiveness part, like on my end of things. And you could be like, "Oh, well, Krista, you're such a bad Catholic that you didn't forgive," and I would respond with, "Well, when your dad leaves you for 22 years, that's if
That's
that
hard.
happens to you, maybe you can be able to understand how hard it was to do that." And
No, I get it, Krista. It's forgiveness is a process. It's a
mhm,
process, and it doesn't feel good all the time. And you just have to constantly say, like, Lord, help me, Holy Spirit, help me with this.
yeah,
But
and
yeah,
so it was
I
this.
empathize with you. I do.
Thank you. Yeah. No, it was a difficult thing to do, or thing to try to do for 7 years. And seeing him as a human who ultimately was trying to do the best that he could at the time with the resources he had, and not villainizing him. And I certainly didn't want to do that, but it just felt so heavy and so difficult. Um,
Yeah.
and I had moments where I'm like, okay, wow, my prayers are answered. Like, I moved from Louisiana to California, and my bio dad drove me. I picked him up in San Antonio, and he drove me the rest of the way to California, which felt very poetic. And I remember thinking, before I moved and before I left Louisiana, like, oh, this was the answered prayer. Like, wow, Lord, like, you really, it took 6 years, 7 years for you to answer that prayer, but like, way to go, God. Like, he's moving me to California. This is it. And actually, even recently, yeah, he's leaving the States. He's moving back home, and he said he thought about moving earlier back to the Philippines, but actually he's
Mm.
going now. And he said, "Well, thank God that I was here all these years, and I lived in California. I'm in LA, but before I lived in San Francisco for 4 months and San Diego for 4 months. And when I was in San Diego, I lived with him and his sister and my
Really,
uncle,
really. I didn't know
and
that.
it was very, I'm never going to have that chance. I mean, maybe I will, but I got a chance to live with him for 4 months. And again, this idea of like, healing came in so many ways that, it took me a long time to forgive him, but then I trusted him enough to like help me drive to California. And he introduced me to some cousins and some family members. And then, now he's going back home, and in a way I won't really get the same time that I've had. And so all the timing was all good. And every step of the way felt like so totally the hand of God. And so my healing really unfolded over 10 years. That was 10 years ago that I met him,
Wow.
2014, my senior year of college. So
How
yeah.
long, out of curiosity, did it take you to reply back to him when he reached out to you on social? That would have been such a shock.
I honestly don't remember, but I mean, it was the day before my 22nd birthday that he reached out to me. And I remember having this kind of like movie moment where time and space was warping. And I was actually in class. Sorry, professor, but I wasn't listening to my professor. I was checking my Facebook, and I saw that message, and like, really, it felt like raw, raw, like everything was like
Mm.
melting around me. And I told my mom at dinner that night, because it was on my birthday. We always used to go to Copeland's for cheesecake. And I said, Mom, like, look at who messaged me on Instagram. And I showed her my phone. And she just like ominously was like, oh, it's happening. And she's like, I always knew this was going to happen. I hated when you put yourself out there on the internet. And I would put my
Oh,
original
wow.
music, and, I had a Twitter account, and, I was just always sharing the music I was
Yeah.
writing and stuff. And yeah, he found me. And I was just like, what do you mean it's happening? And she just kind of said, like, I knew this was going to happen one day. And it all kind of unfolded from there. So yeah, from
I think it's a
February.
wonderful thing. I can see God's hand on all of that, you know?
Oh, for sure. And now I can see it too. And I mean, I think even at the time I had some small awareness of it, but it's really in retrospect and thinking, being able to think in decades. Like now I'm in my 30s, and at the time I was in my 20s, to say, like, oh, God was really answering my prayer in like a way that I wasn't expecting and did not want. I was wanting to reject it. And I remember saying to God, like, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. This is not what I meant. Can
Yeah.
you rewind the track and go back the way that I was trying to do it? But it's what he meant. So thank God for
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so you were living with him for 4 months in California,
Mm-hmm. Until I
and
found a
then,
place in LA. I had a remote job, so it was an easier commute than San Francisco.
yeah. And so just that healing process after you were directly in his life and meeting his family, your family. So what did that look like after that?
Yeah, I mean, just joyful. Like once I met my cousins who I would have otherwise been raised with, it was just a lot of joy and a lot of flourishing for me personally. Like coming out to the West Coast was a little daunting because I didn't really have family here, and I mean, I have some family here on my mom's side, but when I met my cousins, I was really really joyful. Like I always wanted, big sisters, and I would be one of the youngest in this family, in this side of the family. And so I have a lot of big sisters, and I always wanted that. And I also have two brothers in the Philippines that I keep in touch with.
Oh, wow.
And it's just more love. I have 8 nephews, so it's just more people to love and be loved by. And they're here.
Mm,
There's some in LA, Orange, San Diego, Vegas, and
wow.
it's just really. It felt like, wow, like I just fit in with them. When people have the same sense of humor as you and have the same laugh and cheekbones, like it's just weird. Like that, this is
Mm,
family that I never knew, and yet feel I always knew. And it's joyful to have more family and more love. So
yeah,
I
that's
had to get
wonderful.
through that 10 years or 8 years or so of suffering and trying to forgive, and then I got a great gift on the other side of that. So
That's wonderful. So what would your advice be for people that have discovered something and they're for the first time walking through a time of suffering and grief? Like, what would be your advice to them?
I would say go through it, because I know a lot of people say, I'm gonna get over this. I'm gonna get over it. And I'm like,
Mm,
maybe you're not supposed to get over it. Like maybe this is
mm-hmm.
actually really dark, and you don't need to be going over the bridge, but you need to go be under the bridge.
Hmm.
You got to meet that troll, and you got to ask those questions, and you have to um, face the darkest things. And I mean, sometimes it's the darkness of someone else and their sins, and the ways they've affected you and hurt you. But sometimes you have to
Hmm.
see your side of it too, and that you have to kind of look in the mirror and say, like, am I going to be a troll myself and just continue to harbor resentment and anger, and see myself as like maybe a victim in the circumstance? And to some degree, yeah, I was an abandoned little orphan child. That's what it
Right.
felt like
That's
for
right.
most of my life. Or am I going to say, I don't have to stay this orphan feeling? I don't have to stay feeling like I was abandoned and left and rejected. And in fact, when I was able to say, there's stuff that I can do, that I can, like me forgiving, um, me again, a process over for probably 6 years, 7 years, me forgiving allowed me um, the grace to love it. Like suffering, I see it as like a stab to the heart that creates more space for you to love more if you let it.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
so the people who suffer more can love more. And so just let suffering gut out any junk
Hmm.
that doesn't belong there. And then you can
Yeah.
replace where there's more room now, you can replace it. And then maybe greater cavities of your heart are going to be opened up to love. And, sometimes people even get, so I'm Filipino, so like I have a very integrated or interdependent culture that I was raised in, being Filipino, and I think even Cajun. Um, and some people, like what I see in the West and like Americanized, like, oh, I have to find who I am and blah, blah, blah. And it's like this one person show. It's not
It's
a one
not.
person show. That
Mm-mm.
when you allow suffering to pierce you in the heart and like in those deep, dark recesses and all those little spaces, it actually helps you to belong more. And you
Mm.
belong to people, who've felt the same way, or you belong to your family in a deeper way. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's good to suffer.
It is good. Yeah, I definitely have a story with that as well. That I won't get into the details of today, but I will say that a heart wound is one of the hardest and most difficult and trying wounds to heal, because I would always like I could always feel it. I was like just grabbing at my heart, and I told the Lord, like, I just was always trying to fill it somehow, like reaching out even to good friends, and there's a time and place for fellowship through that for sure, but they can't heal you. A friend can't heal you. A thing that you do, it can help, but it's not going to heal the wound. Only God can do that. And I think, I don't know how you felt, but I felt very isolated in that season and process. I also was never taught about grief. I was never taught about suffering. I was never taught about emotional wounds or heart wounds and how to deal with it, or if you should even deal with it. It was something I had to find out and discover on my own. And I was also very involved in the anti human trafficking initiative in my early 20s, mid 20s. And so I was flying out and going to conferences, and that's where I actually met Dr. Dan Allender and many other authors and speakers, and they really impacted my life and my perception of what life really is, and what emotional heartbreak is, and how to find a way to a path to healing and forgiveness, and how necessary forgiveness is. Because I think I felt, along with a lot of other people, you feel justified in not forgiving. That's a very worldly and also logical and reasonable perspective to have when you've been wronged or hurt in any way, especially by a family member, or especially by someone you was close to you, someone you knew and trusted. You felt there's so many levels to this, so you could feel violated, you could feel wronged, and that you feel justified in not forgiving this person, and it feels right. But in that process, your heart becomes so hard, it becomes like a rock. And that, a long time ago, I know we're entering into personal waters here, but that was kind of one of the things that God showed me. That's around the time frame I was in my early 20s, and the Lord was showing me, like, "You- there's a process to this, and I'm going to help you." And he gave me an image of my heart. I laugh at this now. And he showed me an image, and I saw a rock, Krista. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, why are you showing me an image of a rock? I was like, is this my heart? And he said, no, Jen. He was just so delicate. The Lord was so delicate. He said, no, look, look. And he was chipping away at it. And then part of the rock, the exterior, it actually fell off. And I could see a ruby. And he went, that's your heart, and that's what I'm after.
Mm.
So, it was actually like a couple years after that vision and that conversation with the Lord that I had, that I realized, like, hearts, emotionally, we have a spiritual heart and a physical heart, and they're actually both very much interlinked. Another topic for another time, but if the exterior is built up in a hardened way because of bitterness and unforgiveness and trauma and all this stuff, you become the ogre. You become the person with resentment and bitterness that pushes everybody else away, and you live a life of isolation. You live a life of anger and resentment and despair, and you never become the person that God created you to be. So, with what you said about, yes, we are made for community, we're made to be in relationship with other people, 100% yes. In addition to that, I would say we're also made individually in the image and likeness of God, and we are created to be distinctly Krista Corbello, Jennifer Beard, and these people, that don't compare to anybody else's story or life, because God has our own story already written a beautiful story, a wonderful story of romance and wonder and intrigue and mystery and all these things that are set in the story that also involve suffering. But he is the God who suffers with us through these things, and you can only discover your real self and your true self sometimes through suffering, because we all have some healing we have to go through. But the process of healing involves this beautiful discovery of our passions and who we really are. I always joked with my friends. I said I used to wear black like all the time. I was like this power woman, power player, and and then when I went through this process of healing, I started wearing pinks and all these colors and like enjoying art and music and dance and flourishing because I was healing. And I didn't even really know who I was before that because I was so hardened. But I did this process with Christ, and I just want to end with this very brief story with saying that, when I was in the depths of grief and really struggling, I was given another image. And this one is hard for me to talk about. But sorry. I said to the Lord, I said, like, where do I go to put grief or hurt? And he said, do it go to the cross, do it go to the throne. He said, no, you put it here. You put it in my hands. And I saw an image of these nail wounds, the wounds in his hand, and it was so real. And he said, put it here. And I didn't know we are gonna go into this today, sorry. Um, and it should forever changed my life, because I realized he's not only real, but he's the God that suffers with us. And he not only suffered for us on the cross, but he suffers with us every day. He continues to suffer on our behalf. And I released my pain. I put it in his hands. His hands that were already so broken and scarred. And so it's really powerful to realize that we're not alone, and that the story he wrote for us is good, and it can be redeemed no matter what, and that the process of forgiveness is so necessary, and that even in grief, we're not alone. So, anyway.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. I love the images that you were given. I actually thought of the Ezekiel quote of the stone to flesh heart when you told me about when you said about the rock. But then you said ruby. I'm like, ooh, even better. And no, that's so beautiful that the Lord, yeah, of course, is the one who provides the community. And I would not at all want to say that the gift of community and the gift of who God is and what he does is mutually exclusive. Of course, I feel that the Lord, who is the God of the resurrection, the one who is so powerful that he conquers death itself, that of course he is the one who authors the story and provides the community, the people to love you, and the grace to be able to forgive. So I would never want to make that distinction and say that those are two separate things, because they're not.
Right.
But yeah, of course, this what you're talking about is, I mean, it just makes sense that we're talking right now during the Easter season. I know we talked about other dates, but we're in the Easter season, and this upcoming Sunday for us, I don't know when this is going to go out, but it's going to be Good Shepherd Sunday too, that he's not only a good God who raises up these parts of our life from the dead, and he resurrects, gives us our own Easter Sundays in life through forgiveness and his merciful love, of course. But he's just a good shepherd, that he is the one who provides the way. He is the way.
Yeah.
And we're his little flock. We're his little sheep, and he would do anything for us. And he holds us on his shoulders, and he beats back the wolves, and he protects and guards, and he comes after us when we're the one. And sometimes we feel like we're the 99, but we're all the one. We're all his the one. So
Amen. Amen.
it feels like, that's such a good reminder right now.
Yeah, that's good. Wasn't expecting to go that route today. But it's just real. It's real life. And I feel like if I had some direction, Krista, when I was going through all this, like a shepherd of some sort, because I wasn't even in the Catholic Church at that point in my life. I had no shepherd. I had no one to talk to that really understood this. And so I was very isolated. So the fact that you have an organization that's there to help people and help educate people and walk people through the stages of grief is awesome. It's so awesome. Yeah. So I'm going to make sure I give you a good plug for that, so people can find you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I love grief. I was just thinking about that recently. I was like, how do I just get more into grief? Like, I'll talk about grief more. So I'm glad the conversation went where it went.
Yeah. Were there any particular authors that you read that you'd recommend on this topic?
Yeah, so as far as like books, I'm not going to maybe talk about the psychological research, but a lot of people know about the 5 stages of grief from the On Grief and Grieving, On Death and Dying and On Grief and Grieving, which are both
No, I
by
don't actually. I've never heard of it before.
okay, Kubler-Ross is like the one who kind of made the way for the 5 stages of grief. And originally it was about people who were dying. So On Death and Dying was the first time we kind of hear about it in psychological research. But then they later, so David Kessler was, I think, her partner in research maybe. And David Kessler was the one who they also wrote the book on grief and grieving. So not just the people who were dying and experiencing those 5 stages of grief, but the people who were walking with them. So the family members of the people who were dying. So that's kind of the main resource where we get that. So those are both books that are available. Not everyone
Awesome.
can get the other research that I did on grief, which yeah, is more like in an academic. You have to go to like a certain library or whatever. I'm sure. I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
how
Okay.
do people find academic articles anymore. But
There are good links, and I'll make sure that I source those as part of this too. So
yeah,
absolutely.
I would say another book that was really helpful for me is How to Go on Living When Someone You Love Dies, which is by Therese Rando.
Oh
So
wow.
I always felt like my grief intervention was 2-part. It was one, like having the language for grief. So that's the kind of 5-step model that is pretty popular. And by the way,
Okay.
there's other theoretical models on grief. So don't feel like that is like Bible necessarily. So, but that's just the one that I prefer to use. So Kubler-Ross, Kessler, 5 stages of grief is one part of it, but the other part of it, which Therese Rando talks about pretty well in the book How to Go on Living When Someone You Love Dies, is the 6R processes. And that's it's not just having the language for grief and being able to like openly talk about it. It's saying, hey, this is what, like, I don't have to stay there and I can move on with life and have a meaningful life besides like outside of this grief. Like the grief is always with you, but that also it doesn't have to define who you are or what role you play in the family and things like that. So being the grief, so grief is like this is the internal feeling, is how I picture it, is what you're feeling in your heart. Grieving is the process of working through it and moving on. So both
Yeah.
of those are important in
Yes.
any kind of grief. So I would say those two. Let me think if I can think of anything else off the top of my head. Yeah, my research was so particular, so I think those are the ones that are
No,
more
that's
general.
wonderful. Like this is especially from my perspective because like I really didn't have any resources. Like Dr. Dan Allender is wonderful, and so he was kind of my first and only resource. And I had already kind of been a couple years, I think, into the healing process at that point. So so yeah, I think I'll make sure that I get as many sources as I can and resources and plug them into this so people can have the links that they need, because oh my gosh, that would have helped me tremendously. And you just don't feel quite as alone because you're like, oh look, here are the steps that I need to go through, and oh look, this is normal and this is good and this is healthy. And so I think this is such a good topic for people, because like you said, oh yeah, people know about the five, stages or categories or whatever. And it's like, no, not always. Uh, so this is good, Krista. I just really appreciate you sharing your story, and us sharing and getting a little emotional. It's good. It's good. But I think this is such a necessary topic, and I'm actually really interested in reading Kubler-Ross and some others that you named, and learning a little bit more, because when we find a new life through the process of healing, we're able to help others and not just empathize, but help point the way and be there to pray for them and encourage them. And you can't really do that until you've walked through it, you know? And life continues to throw things at us. Like, we just lost our only uncle, on my
Mm,
dad's side. An amazing man. His last homily was epic. Father, if y'all need to YouTube Father Mark Beard. His last homily was wonderful. I may even link that too, just because. But
yeah.
the grief in losing someone, especially unexpectedly, when it just
Hmm.
jolts you. And I walked through so much more of that grief at the beginning of this year. So yeah, life is not a fairy tale. There's wonderful blessings that unfold through life. But ultimately it's riddled with disappointment and failures and fears and griefs and suffering. But I think the key is knowing how to walk through that.
Hmm.
So I agree with you. It's good.
Did I tell you that we heard about your uncle's death in Portugal when I was at World Youth Day?
No.
So actually the priest who was with us knew your uncle, Father Chester. He's at the cathedral in Lafayette, and he offered whatever mass that day we had. He was like, "We're offering up this mass for Father Beard," and then I think Alexis texted me not long after that, and so like that day I was thinking of you, the day that
Oh, thank you.
everyone found out. So we were praying for
Yeah.
you from Portugal.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was crazy, Krista, because we didn't realize how many people knew him, like worldwide, and how much of an impact his life had
Mm,
on so many people. It was just really incredible, and his life is still having an impact on people. So it's a beautiful thing.
yeah,
So thank you.
yeah.
Well, thank you for this, Krista. Is there anything else you want to add for today? Because I would like to eventually have a part two with you.
Yeah, for today, I mean, maybe specifically for you, Jen, like what a beautiful heart that you have for sharing the truth, but also that was such a tender moment, and like not just the truth of the faith or who God is, but just like the truth of like who He is to you in particular. What a gift that is. So thank you for sharing your story and the images that the Lord gave you in prayer. That's so beautiful. So I'll be praying for
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Krista, for being on my podcast today. I really appreciate it. You're such a treasure as a friend and to so many people. And so I look forward to doing a part two with you.
Yes, I'm happy to come back. So thank you so much, Jen.
All right, Krista. Thank you.